Welcome back to the 287th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, all of them pertaining to Joe Biden and how he is handling the little flub, should we say, after the debate. There's been lots of criticism from both sides. We're going to really focus on the Democratic response, the different factions that have formed, and we're going to talk about my prediction, which is everybody's going to fall in line. He's just going to keep on going. We're also going to end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into our daily debate. So, did you see this response coming? If you listened to my post-debate, I said that Biden's probably just going to fall in line. Biden's going to get everybody to fall in line, and they're not going to be able to get rid of him. The ruminations about it were going to be temporary. Did you see that happening? Did you have the idea that it was totally over? I mean, when I first listened to the debate and I had that sinking feeling when he said, we're going to beat Medicare, I was sitting there for, it's over. And then I waited a little bit. I was like, no, okay. At the end of the day, he did okay enough. The media landscape's not really going to let it. And then again, the response was very different than I thought, and we'll get into that. But what were you thinking throughout the course of that? I'd love to know what everybody has to say. Sorry we're not doing the Dip Dive Dodge today. We'll do that segment on Monday instead of on Friday, because I really want to focus on all of these different angles. So, let's jump into our first article. This comes from the New York Times. Election updates. Biden faces more calls to drop out as allies remain uneasy. So the New York Times has definitely taken on the position of the Biden get out. Biden, you need to be gone. We cannot have you anymore. That is one faction for sure. And then we have another faction that we'll go over, which is a little bit more of the Obama camp. And then the final one is these last two have been about half a week removed. So I grabbed these when it was happening, and that's why I'm going to relay it. And then the final one's going to talk about how we all zip it back together and bring the narrative back in. But let's jump into the New York Times article. So the headline, obviously, read that. Now let's move on to the actual meat, the substance of it. Quote, President Biden on Wednesday faced a fresh wave of pressure to end his campaign and rethink his decision to run for re-election, as Democrats from Hollywood to Capitol Hill aired grave concerns that he is set to lose to former President Donald Trump in November and drag his party's chances of controlling Congress down with him. Representative Nancy Pelosi of California, the former House Speaker and longtime Biden ally, gave the strongest public signal yet that Democrats still are divided on Mr. Biden's insistence that he stay in the race, saying that time is running short for him to make a decision. Speaking on MSNBC's Morning Joe, Ms. Pelosi, 84, said that she would back Mr. Biden, whatever he decides. So the really crazy comment that came from Nancy Pelosi was actually over the course of the week, where the question was put to her, is this a sign of more? And she said, well, we have to ask whether this is just an incident or this is a sign of just a medical condition, something that's a little bit more persistent. And she didn't say the little bit more persistent part. I added that. But it was definitely alluded to. And the question is, did she learn her lesson from Dianne Feinstein, trying to keep somebody that was not capable of doing the job on the ticket? Now, whether or not you 100% agree with my assessment that Biden is not capable of doing the job, you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with anybody. You could think that he's the most well-put-together person in the world. I'll tell you now, some Democrats do not agree with you. Most Republicans didn't agree with you 2 years ago, but some Democrats do not agree with you. So you got to deal with that. You got to fight all those sort of incumbents back, because it was for a little bit there, it was semi-acceptable to call out Joe Biden and say, hey, we need you to step down. We need you to be the leader that we expected you to be in 2020. You said that you were going to be someone who is kind of like a caretaker. He didn't explicitly come out and say it, but he kind of had this air about him, which was, hey, we're going to set up the next generation of Democrats. We're going to beat Trump, because I'm the only person that can do that. And then we're going to set up the next page, the next chapter in the American story. We're going to move on past Trumpism, and I'm going to let some younger people come in. Then again, not everybody actually believed that, because, he's a politician. He doesn't just mean to run for the first 4. He wants all of the 8. But some people truly did at least understand that he's saying something like that, and if he has to step aside, he will. Now we've come to the moment where a lot of people are saying he should step aside. If you watch the debate, you are probably thinking in your head that he should step aside. Even some of his responses, George Stephanopoulos did not go his way. It was fine. It was okay. But if he was trying to present the most strong argument as to why he's perfectly fine now, he did not do it. It was a mediocre attempt, which would be fine if he had a okay debate night. But no, he didn't have an okay debate night. He had the worst debate night any sitting president has had ever. That we at least have on television, and that we have easy records to go back and see. I'm sure there are some terrible ones, maybe in previous presidential debates, there were some worse flubs and they didn't get mentioned, which I doubt. But the point being that this is the worst one that we know about that especially has been televised. So all these efforts afterwards, going on Morning Joe, even people on the left and the right, and let's be clear, I do listen to more, when I'm listening to podcasts, not just reading, I definitely listen to more friendly to Washington crowds. I'm not sitting there and listening to some of the Hills podcasts, but even some of the mainstream, some of the CNN anchors, some of the MSNBC hosts have been saying that this isn't enough, or that he's doing okay. They're not giving him outright praise. But all the people that I've actually listened to that talk about this, who are Democrats, except maybe the Pod Save Bros, because yes, I do listen to the Pod Save Bros. They're not the bastion of nonpartisan politics. They definitely have their horse in the race. But even they are coming out and saying, yeah, no, this sort of stuff is not good. It does not portray you well. Then again, they've kind of hedged. It's interesting because, actually, I don't want to call out the Pod Save Bros. They have said some things within the last 2 months that now they're not necessarily contradicting, but they're adding to it. It's like, why didn't you mention that in the first place? And that's because even the most active Democratic operators are coming in and saying, no. Okay, Biden, I don't know, man. I don't know. You're not giving us confidence here. And that, like I said, is not just in the disaffected non-establishment. It's from the New York Times. They have repeatedly called on Joe Biden to not be the candidate. And you have other scathing articles just like this one that break it down. So let's jump into a little bit more here. Quote, Mr. Biden, 81, has said his mind is made up about continuing his campaign and scheduled a sit-down interview for Monday with NBC News. His second major network news interview since his poor debate performance last month, he has called on Democrats to unite behind him. Quote, on Wednesday evening, Peter Welch of Vermont, became the first Democratic senator to publicly call, not to do little ruminations, not to say, oh, hey, I'm not sure about it, not to have a meeting like Mr. Warner and then actually cancel on it. No, to publicly call on the president to step aside. Quote, we cannot unsee President Biden's disastrous debate performance, Mr. Welch wrote in an opinion essay in the Washington Post, adding, for the good of the country, I am calling on President Biden to withdraw from the race. Well, I mean, that's pretty unabashed. And that is not just people on the outside. That is not just disaffected. That is someone in the mainstream. Now, remember, he is the first senator, and there are 51 there are technically 50 other senators who are Democratic. So 1 in 50 ain't a good record. Then you look at the House. While there have been people that said, I don't know, maybe we should talk about it. Ro Khanna said, not the other day, he didn't necessarily say that. He said, Biden's our guy. But if Biden was to come to me and say, I don't know if I could do it, should I step down? He would immediately say, yeah, don't step down. If you don't have the confidence to do the job, and what I mean by that is do the campaigning job, don't do it. So there's definitely some fringes that are at least alluding to the fact that they would be open to the idea of not having Biden, and they are really willing to criticize his debate performance. But even then, say it's about 200, I believe it's 217 Democratic members. I could be off by that number, but 1 out of 267, based on the number I provided for the House, that is the overall legislators that are actually elected that are Democratic, and 1 out of 265. That's a small number. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything. And that's exactly what the Biden team is thinking. The Biden team has been riding this one out hard. They have heard the calls from the New York Times. They put out press releases. You know how I mentioned the Pod Save Bros? The Pod Save Bros, they felt like they were under attack when they got a press release that came out from the Biden team talking about self-righteous podcast hosts, the commentary, when he was on Morning Joe, he talked about the elite opinion that is trying to push me out. And I'm sure you've heard all of these things, but it's just always interesting to take a step back and to see how much control, one, the president has over his party, because at the end of the day, especially after the primary, if it was before the primary and they wanted to do some funky stuff, technically it's before the convention and they want to do some funky stuff, but Joe Biden has the lock-in. This is why when I watched the debate and I came out afterwards, I said, I think everybody's going to fall behind him. I couldn't necessarily say why, besides the fact that they're just going to lock it down. The Democrats are going to spin and they're going to spin their wheels and they're going to say, well, it wasn't the best thing in the world, but he is the president of the United States. But this is why. Because at the end of the day, Joe Biden has the name recognition. Joe Biden has been out on the trail. It is too far away from the actual election to get enough passion from the average Democratic voter to actually get a change. But also, it's close enough that the activists are realizing, hey, we need to start to get active, and I don't know. I don't know if we can actually get a new person on the ticket and keep our messaging going forward. Now, of course, there are plenty who want to see him gone. And what I just described, the normal voter and the activists, they are not monoliths. So to pretend as though that every single moderate voter isn't paying attention yet, to pay attention that every single activist is having the opinion that we're getting pretty close and it would be hard to change things up. No, there are plenty of activists who come out and said, no, this is the way that we can actually get his delegates to be uncommitted and that we can try to get him off the ticket. There are pressure campaigns. I mean, there are signs outside and I don't know if these were technically activists. These may be everyday people, but there were signs outside the White House that read, Joe Biden, we love you. Please step down. And when you see that contrast there, it is absolutely hilarious. And that's the Biden team was sitting there saying, okay, we have enough love, we have enough at least goodwill with the people that we're going to see people outside the White House putting up, Joe Biden, we love you, stay in. But no. They're literally getting the opposite message in front of their house every once in a while, which is, no, we do love you. We care so much about you that we don't want you to put yourself through this. Come on, step down, be a good president, be a good steward of the future generation of Democrats. So, with all that, we've gone through the sort of the mainstream response, which has been a little bit of outright stop, please stop, but also a little bit of hedging because, like I said, it's only 1 out of 267. And the media is the one that is pushing this more than the Democratic senators. And as we'll get to the final article, we'll really highlight the change within the senators, the House, and the people that are operating within the Democratic Party, not well, some people would argue that the media is the wing of the Democratic Party, not in actual party affiliation, maybe in the way that they act sometimes, but the people who are actually operating within Democratic politics within the House, the Senate, and throughout Washington have fallen silent. But hey, we'll save that one for the end. Let's go to the next one that comes from The Hill. Ex-Obama aides are among Biden's loudest post-debate Democratic critics. And this was interesting when I came to this because I listened, like I said, to Pod Save America. They are all previous Obama staffers. They are Democratic activists? I guess technically just actors is probably the best way to go about it. So they say a lot of things where if you're an average moderate, if you're a Republican, you're like, whoa, hey, relax. Okay, like I don't even know how you have this opinion. I don't understand how you could consistently have this opinion. But they do at least always project a message which is meant to lock down any sort of Democratic voter. If you are a person who wants to understand how the Democrats are playbooking some things, even though it is a little bit veiled, they're not giving away the entire playbook. They're not talking about everything, strategic points behind the scene, but they are definitely at least relaying what the message is. They're putting a public face on what the behind the scenes message is. If you want to have an understanding of how Democrats are thinking about certain things, or at least the Obama era activists or the people that are operating within those circles, you should go listen to Pod Save America. You can skip around. If you don't like something, if you don't like a certain section, skip it. I'm not saying give them any money. I'm saying just go listen to one or two, and you can get an insight into what is going on in the minds of some of these activists and these people that are on the Democratic side of the aisle who have a little bit of influence, or at least are still talking heads for the Obama worldview, the Obama establishment. And that's why I think is very interesting when you see things like this. And it's not just the Pod Save America bros. There are plenty of other staffers that have gone throughout the rest of DC who are making comments as well. But they all used to be underneath Obama. And maybe there's something to that. Maybe they're texting with the previous president. Maybe they're just all in the same circles and they don't like Joe Biden and his staff anyway. And they're like, this is our opportunity to get him out. Or maybe only one of them got something from the president. Maybe one really close one like Axelrod got some talking points from the president, or at least had the conversation with him. He's like, yeah, Mr. President, you're actually right. The president codified some of his beliefs and he spread it along the way. I don't know. Maybe they, like I said, they're just predisposed to not liking him, but they have all been very strong advocates for Biden. One, you should at least seriously consider jumping off the ticket. This was not good for you. This is not going to end well for you. And as things have sort of gone on, they say, well, okay, yeah, I don't necessarily know if we should get Biden off the ticket, but the fact that people are saying we're bedwetters, that we're trying to undermine the current sitting president and the next future president, they're like, if we can't have a conversation, if we can't even describe what is accurately happening here, we are blind, and we are not participating in a democracy. We're participating in a pre-designed monarchical appointment where Joe Biden is said monarch and he is just given the crown essentially. And they don't use all of those fancy terms, but that's basically what they're dancing around. They're saying that, is it actually democratic to say that the people can't have their voices heard, that we can't even put our concerns out there? So all of these things said, let's jump into the article. Quote, ex-aides to former President Obama have been among the loudest voices in the fiery Democratic debate over whether President Biden should withdraw from the presidential race. David Axelrod, Obama's former senior advisor, has repeatedly cast doubts about Biden's chances, saying this week that Biden is losing the race and really needs to consider what the right thing to do here is. So, I think that's always interesting how they cast it, which is the right thing to do. It's not necessarily trying to appeal to his, you can't win. It's not trying to hurt his ego. It's trying to appeal to that, at least the messaging is trying to appeal to what they perceive as Joe Biden as a decent person. What is the right thing to do here? No. What you need to do is appeal to his ego. What you need to do is say, Joe, okay, we'll write you down in the history books. You did a good thing beating Mr. Trump. We're going to make sure that all the history books say that. This is what the Democratic operatives, that's how they have to sell it to him. That's how they have to go about it. Because at the end of the day, he is a person who cares deeply about his legacy. He's been fighting for this presidency for all of these years. And does he want to just be a one-term president after fighting for this long because he was running in the 90s? No. Okay. There are also advisors around. Some people are attributing a lot of this to his advisors around him, Jill and Hunter. And I think that is also pretty accurate in that they are providing lots of suggestions. But the question is, can Joe Biden, even if you believe that he has diminished faculties, can his personality still come through? I have known plenty of, and I take that back. I'm going to speak to 3 specific examples. A person who was getting older that I knew that had some form of sunsetters, some sort of dementia. Another one that had Alzheimer's, and another one that was just getting older in general. In all 3 of these cases, all of their personalities were still intact. Certain key aspects of them were intact, and they were prompted, or at least as the old age came in, either the disease or just, like I said, old age started to become more palpable in the way that they interacted. You could actually feel it. Their personalities shifted a little bit, but certain key aspects still shine through. And I think that we're kind of underplaying, even though Joe Biden probably doesn't have the most agency in the world. And what I mean by that is he doesn't have every single faculty on lock. There are still certain things that shine through. And I think his ego has always been something that he is, at least, if not always trying to massage, then is something that he is always aware of how things will affect him and his legacy and how people perceive him. And I think that asking him to step down from the presidency is something that could be a big blow to his ego. So there very well could be that element there, that it's not just the advisors around him, but it is himself. And I don't want to ever remove agency from the president because we don't know what's happening in those meetings. So I'm going to work under the assumption that he's getting talking points. He's getting advice from his family, as has been talked about. Hunter Biden's basically being a gatekeeper now, but also the fact that he is still a person. He is still able to make some decisions. And we know that these characteristics have been present for some time. Even though he is cast as gentle Scranton Joe, that doesn't mean that he doesn't get angry. We've seen this before. Even if you wanted to say that the decline is very recent, we have seen these characteristics come out before. When he tries to use righteous indignation in order to appear as though he's in the right, and how dare you ask that question, sometimes it works. Sometimes it comes off as anger. And whether that's old age or whether that's because his pride is wounded, I'll leave that one up to you. But it's just very interesting that is the appeal. The appeal is do what's right from some of the Democratic operatives, which is appealing to the decent Joe Biden that they think they know. When I'm sitting here saying, no, be more politically shrewd, appeal to his pride. But then again, I am not a Democratic operative. And if Joe Biden doesn't step down, I don't think it necessarily matters. If Joe Biden does step down, then I think I'll be much more interested, because I think that actually shakes up the race. As of right now, if Joe Biden does not step down, I think it's going to still be a close one, but I think that Trump is probably going to come out on top. It will probably be like 49-48. And you're saying, whoa, Alex, what do you mean? Yeah, the polls, and that's another reason I said what I said after the debate. Biden's team and the rest of the Democrats will fall in line. The rest of the Democrats will fall in line for the most part, and Biden's team has been predicting this, and they're saying in their own minds, they're like, okay, it's going to be us versus Trump at the ballot box. And are more people afraid of voting for Trump or having Trump as a president versus the people that don't necessarily want to have an older person who had a few flubs in the White House? They're betting that the anti-Trumpers are larger and that the party will recoalesce. And I think that's actually relatively accurate, especially with how RFK voters go. There's some that are from Democrats, some that are for Republican. I would actually see more of the Republican votes stay with, or at least the new coalition. I think that some would probably stay with RFK more than the Democrats who are currently looking at him right now. So I think it could very well tighten a lot. Then again, that prediction is 4 months off. There's so many different factors. There could be an October surprise. I would not say that one. I am not as sure about as my previous one either. The reason that I wanted to do this follow-up is because of the comments I made after the debate. I tried to outline the fact that this is just, we already knew it to some degree on a subconscious level. I think you knew it too, which is they're not going to let their main guy go unchecked. And also, even if he was going to drop out, he has to maintain the narrative. He has to say, no, I'm in it, until he's just not in it. And at the end of the day, the question is, if he drops out too close to the actual election, would there be a reasonable argument to 25th Amendment him, and which would also hurt his legacy? So if he waited until right before the convention, or he waited until November and he said, hey, Kamala Harris, could you please take my place? Then it's hard to 25th Amendment him. Maybe they cast it as a certain breaking news health crisis. I don't know. Those are all things that are really far off. But that prediction is harder compared to the one that I made from 2 weeks ago, which is everybody's going to coalesce. You just knew it. You just knew it from watching some of the commentators, the Gavin Newsoms, the Raphael Warnocks trying to repair it. They weren't the most ardent Biden supporters, the people who have political careers ahead of them that rely on staying loyal to the Democratic Party. they were falling in line almost immediately. Not even they were willing to cast off Joe Biden because they thought that the winds would still be in the favor of Joe Biden. And the winds, not the win, the winds would be in favor of Joe Biden. And it appears that the career Democrats are falling in line. And that's exactly why I wanted to come to our last article that comes from the Washington Examiner. The headline reads, quote, Democrats' willingness to speak out against Biden plummets after embarrassing leaks. Washington Examiner. So this is what I wanted to end with. This is what I wanted to get to. The other ones, they're from the media. They're from the outside Obama world. They are the New York Times, of all places. And they are the people who have been pied. They've been saying that Biden's okay for quite some time. They have been telling people, no, this was just a small thing, no big deal. Don't worry about this. And now that Biden has failed spectacularly, he has basically looked at them and said, try to defend this one. He's like, he's passing him the ball like, what you got? Help me out, please. I can't score the three. I need you to help me out. And they're like, you just put me on the very edge of the semicircle with 2 seconds left and a 6'5" guy guarding me. Okay. This issue, this huge problem that you have, this narrative that's been built up about you, it's blocking me now. It's way too big. I can't just shoot for the three and hope. I'm going to maybe try a little bit, but no, I'm going to complain after the game. I'm going to look at you and say, whoa, what are you doing? And that's what they've been doing. They've been calling him out. But the people that have political careers, the people that are getting their information leaked, that have certain staffers that are probably more aligned with Biden, they see that as a proper trajectory and they're leaking certain things. And the DNC overall, the party establishment nationwide, but also the caucuses on DC, they are growing mum. Mum's the word, except for that one, maybe two people that we talked about that have come out and publicly said something. Mum is the word. Now, I do, on a state level, there have been calls that have growing. Also, Adam Smith, technically. So it's not just the one now that I'm actively thinking about it. The New York Times article was a little bit older at that point. So my point being that there are people that are coming out and saying things. A lot of them happen to be on more to the state side of things, which is interesting for sure. But the point is, in Congress, not so much. The rumblings have started to die down. Quote, Democrats have scrambled as to how to respond following Biden's disastrous debate performance, with most closing ranks behind Biden. Some dissent and concern voiced by members in closed-door meetings were leaked to the press, showcasing the extent of doubt surrounding Biden's mental fitness, resulting in an embarrassment for the party. Democratic leadership responded by cracking down on all leaks, leading even more to fear voicing dissent. And you know what? I think you probably, if you haven't heard this report, I think it's a very, very interesting one. They are having meetings now. They're having an all-caucus meeting, quote, admonishing leaking and announcing that cell phones would not be permitted. They're doing some FBI. They're doing some national intelligence sort of issues. I've walked... Can I say that? Let's just assume that I can't say that. If you walk into a secure facility, then you have to put your phones into the basket. Everybody stops working when you walk in and they close down all their computers. You can't see anything. You have to just either go to where you're getting the information or you have to be there to do your job. Everything basically stops. They're treating this like a skiff. They're treating this like national security information. Put your phone in the basket. We're going to put them in lead-lined pockets. You can't have any of this information get out to the outside. You just have to use your memory. I'm like, well, for me personally, my memory, especially when dealing with all the different, because they say almost 30 members voiced their opinions during this caucus meeting, I'd be like, can I write something down, please? I'll be honest, my memory's okay, but it's not the best in the world. I mean, I'm going to need something to write on, and they'll probably say, no, you can't write anything down. Next thing you know, it's going to be Xeroxed and copied and sent to all the different newsrooms throughout Washington. It's not happening. So it's just absolutely hilarious to me. We're looking at the different worlds of Biden realism, the one where it's realistically he's our candidate. We need to support him. We can't do much now, and he's not backing down. We can't do anything if he doesn't. And then there's the other realistic world, which is we have a messaging problem. We need to actually really evaluate whether or not Joe Biden's the right person. And when he talks about defending democracy, being the right person to shepherd it, then you have to be willing to take on those arguments. That's more from the Obama side. And then you have the first perspective that we presented today, which is that realism is, hey, you're not the man for the job. And I would say all of these are relatively realistic based on the perspective that they have, where they're coming from. If you're a career politician, you do not want to be the one peeling away from the loyalty of the party because that may hurt you in the future. If you're a Democratic operator on the outside who's from the Obama era, you have an aspirational idea of what a president should be. You've seen Joe Biden before, and you know that this is a huge cognitive decline, and realistically, you can be a little bit more critical. And if you're the New York Times and all these other news outlets who have had their reputation, how should I say, soiled by the fact that they have been saying Biden is fine, or at least being willing to engage in the, this thing happens, but we're behind him 100%. They are being realistic about their situation where they say, we need to call him out. We need to make sure this is obvious. And they're also just trying to get the information out to the people. Maybe it took a little bit of cognitive dissonance. Maybe it took a little bit of a shock for them to realize, okay, maybe my sources weren't right on this one, because maybe they weren't paying attention to it either. Maybe all of them were on their beats. They were doing their thing. They see a few little things about Biden here or there, but then they actually tuned into one of the press conferences and they're like, oh, that's okay. And then they tuned into the debate and they're like, wow, that's terrible. Maybe that's realistic. Maybe it wasn't a giant concerted media effort. That's always possible. And I think we should always leave room for that. But either way, it doesn't really matter because they have their angle now. But with all of that, we've gone through the multiple sides. Now we're going to talk about a foreign friend of ours. We're going to talk about the pandas. We're going to talk about our daily delight. This one comes from South China Morning Post. Headline reads, hopes of small first as panda couple prepare for Hong Kong move. So what they're talking about here, there are a few pandas that have been sent to Hong Kong before. They haven't been able to breed, and now they're sending a new couple to Hong Kong in hopes that they can breed. I actually didn't realize that it's really hard, especially in captivity, because pandas only ovulate, meaning that they only are able to get pregnant like once a year. That's insane. So these conservation efforts are absolutely adorable. If you want to see any of the cute photos, videos from this article, or you want to read any of today's articles, all the links will be in the description below the like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, and Podvine, and the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. And I may have something in the works for some new content coming up. We'll see. But with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.